Failure is the foundation for all success. Failure is the soil that the seed of success drops into. No one who's successful in anything hasn't failed. But the ultimate failure, the failure that you die with, because this game does end, folks. This game's gonna be over eventually, right? And when the game's over, you gotta ask yourself, you gotta look at yourself and say, did I give it my all? And if you failed and didn't continue, didn't get up again, didn't choose to be reborn again, and that's the ultimate failure.
What is up, YouTube? Live via satellite here, and today we are talking Kingdom, manga chapter 587. Well, I'm gonna tell you what, guys, I did not see that death coming. I did not see Kuko being the one to die in this moment here. It actually caught me pretty off guard, but when I was thinking back to last chapter, I think a big clue that Kyoko was going to die was that Shotaku had so much dialogue and inner monologue. I actually remember while reading that chapter, I was thinking, wow, Shotaku's really saying a lot this chapter. And we really normally don't hear too much from him. Not that Kyoko's that much more vocal, but I feel like in the past, if we heard anything from the two, usually it was Kyoko. So yeah, we could have definitely saw that as a clue, but the dead giveaway would have definitely been if we had known that Shotaku and Kyoko were actually brothers. Because let's face it, it's a known fact that Hara hates siblings. He gets some sort of satisfaction in killing them off. But Hara was pretty slick this time. He didn't let us know that these guys were siblings until the very last second. Pretty much leaving us with no hints, which I guess is okay because most people don't pay attention to the obvious clues anyway.
It's actually an opportunity for members of parliament to actually digest and go through the documentation that is going to be presented to the public. And the opportunity for proper engagement is actually after the tabling of the...
Alright, so the chapter starts out with an unconscious Ohan and the rest of his group still in the middle of the Raikoku. And as they're trying to fight their way through it, Shotaku realizes that the only way they're going to be able to make their way out of there is that if someone actually stays behind and sacrifices themselves so the others can escape. And almost as if he knew what his brother was thinking, we see Kyoko actually turn around and hold off some of these enemies on his own. And while you see Kanjo and Shotaku looking on pretty worried, you see Kyoko tell his brother to go. And as we see him trying to fight off some of these 10 spears, we see him take a shot directly through the center of his armor. And after this, you can tell that he's done, but he's definitely intending to take out as many as he can with them. And as Shotaku looks on, he lets them pretty much know that even though they tried to not get too invested and stay alive on the battlefield, Kyoko thinks everything's okay because he believes that Ohan was a man worth dying for, and tells Shotaku that he leaves the rest up to him. And yeah, guys, to me this was a pretty emotional scene. I actually really liked Kyoko. I thought he was a pretty cool character. Even his weapon was pretty cool. And you know how it goes, guys. We definitely got to give our boy a proper send-off.
And I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
Over at Shin, we find out that he didn't leave the battle that he was having against the Gyun army. In fact, we find out he isn't aware at all what happened to Ohan and the Gyoko-ho. And even though he can sense that something's wrong, he can't quite put his finger on what the problem actually is. And I really found this interesting because I thought that Shin had picked up on Gyun's plan a couple chapters ago, and that he would actually go and help out Ohan. But what we see here is that Shin actually stayed put in his battlefield and continued to fight harder against the Gyun army. Then we move back over to the 10 spears and we see the remnants of them angry with Kyoko, mainly because his interference allowed for Ohan to get away. But either way, what's interesting here is they're not too concerned because they believe that Ohan won't survive much longer anyway. But the 10 spears and Gyun soon decide that it's time to be on their way because at the moment they're still in the middle of the Gyoko-ho. And they're expecting that the rest of the army will soon collapse on them, not to mention that they want to get back to address the wound that Gyun has. And even though Gyun, the Ryun, and the 10 spears were pretty successful accomplishing their mission, we see that they didn't leave this battle unscathed. Not only did Gyun have his dominant arm injured, but they lost half their Ryun, and 4 of the 10 spears were also killed. And we find out a lot of the damage done to the 10 spears was done by Kyoko, which actually made some of the 10 spears want to take his head. But it looks like either because they were in a rush or maybe as a sign of respect, Gyun says to just leave it as they fall back to their army. And for some reason I found it kind of funny that the 10 spears were hating so hard on Kyoko. I mean, he's already dead. Anything else is a bit overkill if you ask me. Seeing that Gyun has completed his mission, Chigaryu and his forces also fall back to regroup and reorganize their army. And this is also where Kanjo finds out for the first time exactly what happened to Ohan. And even though he's upset with Kanjo for allowing this to happen to Ohan, a lot of the other officers are trying to let Banyo know that if it weren't for Kanjo, then Ohan probably would have died. But Banyo isn't listening to any reason right now and is still pretty much yelling toward Kanjo, asking him where he's going. And this was just another pretty sad moment because a defeated Kanjo pretty much tells Banyo that he's sorry and he just needs a minute. And we see why, because he's on his way over to Kyoko. And as he kneels down next to the body, he apologizes to Kyoko for pretty much the fact that he had to sacrifice himself. And you could just tell that Kyoko meant a lot to Kanjo. I mean, he was so emotional about losing Kyoko that he literally passed out on top of him. So then we get a little bit of an overhead look at the battlefield, and we see after what happened with Ohan, the Kyokuho had no choice but to fall back and cede some ground to the Chogaryu army. While on the other side of the battlefield, Shin was actually able to gain some ground against Gyun's army due to him being absent from his army. But it was at this point also that Chigaryu decided to end the battles for the day earlier than normal. And he did this for two reasons. The first reason was because he didn't want the Hishin unit to take advantage of the fact that Gyun was injured. And the second reason was because he wanted the bad news about Ohan's defeat to actually spread throughout his unit. And not just his unit, but the entire right wing. And as Chigaryu withdrew back to his campgrounds, he was confident that this demoralizing news would mean certain victory for him and his men the next day. And this was smart on Chigaryu's part because sometimes bad news is hard to handle.
Officers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, were asking people to be on the lookout for a man who robbed a store. And I think we do have his description. Can we take that? Let's take his description. Okay, this is the guy they wanted people in Pennsylvania to be out on the lookout for.
Speaking of how demoralized they would be, over at the Kyokuho unit's HQ, we see just how true that is, as we see that some of the men are literally crying over Ohan's condition. And it's at this point where Shin actually arrives at the Kyokuho unit, and as he's making his way toward Ohan's tent, he's met by Shotaku. And Shotaku explains to Shin that at the moment Ohan's being tended to, and that's pretty much why everybody's waiting outside quietly. Even though as he's saying this, you actually do see that Banyo's out there making a pretty big fuss. But after Shin inquires just how bad is Ohan, Shotaku tells him that he's so bad that all they can really do for him right now is to pretty much pray for him and hope for the best. And it's at this point where Shin tells Shotaku to let him through. And even though Shotaku tries to protest, Shin tells him that it's okay. And this is where Shin makes a beeline straight for Banyo. And what he has to tell him is to get a grip on himself, because Ohan is gonna be fine. And even though Banyo goes on letting Shin know how serious the situation's been, that Ohan's heart has stopped multiple times, Shin reassures Banyo again, saying even still he's gonna be fine, and that he's not going to die here. And for some reason, Shin speaking like this to Banyo really actually reminded me of the time when Mobu said a very similar speech when Motun was wounded by Kame during the duel between Mobu and Kame. And it seemed like just hearing these words from Shin really started to perk up the Kyokuho unit, as we start to see that a lot of them are starting to believe that Ohan will not allow himself to die here. And then we get to the point where Shin even offers the uses of Kyokai's services, stating to Banyo that Kyokai has some medicines and techniques that even their healers wouldn't be aware of. And the way Kyokai says oi to Shin, you could tell that she wasn't aware that she was going to be put on the spot right here and now. But the one thing I think a lot of people missed here is that half of this statement was meant to be a joke by Hara. Because obviously the first part where he's talking about Kyokai using the medicine, this is obviously referring to the medicine that she used on Shin way back when he was fighting Rinko. And we saw how effective it was then. But the second part about her using some of these healing techniques, this is actually referring to earlier in this arc, when in chapter 550, Shin and Kyokai were really worn out from their battle with Gi-eun, and Shin had went to visit Kyokai in her tent. And she had asked Shin to give her his hand, and at the time she claimed it was a technique to be able to share one's life force, when really it was just a way for her to hold Shin's hand, but he was just too stupid to realize it. Which is even more evident by the fact that he's offering for her to do the same techniques for Ohan. And even though for me this was a pretty sad chapter, it seems like things started to pick up toward the end, because even after Kyokai tells Shin that she can't fix everything and she's wondering why he's not coming in there with her to see Ohan, for some reason the statement that Shin made saying that he doesn't want to go in here and see him when he's a stiff breeze away from kicking the bucket was like really hilarious to me for some reason.
A day for the record books. Hilton Gatterly, reporting for Channel 3 Eyewitness News, from atop Mount Washington.
But then Shin gets right to business, telling the men that he didn't come all the way out here just to see Ohan. And he lets the Gyokuho know that he's there because he wanted to discuss with the Gyokuho how they're gonna beat Zhao's left wing tomorrow. And this literally shocks the entire group. Shitaku even remembers back to when Kanja was saying that the Chin right wing still had the Hishin unit. And Banyo, in literal disbelief that Shin is still thinking about winning in this particular situation, is probably even more taken aback when Shin tells him, of course, why else do we fight if not to win? And even though they may think him to be a fool, you can tell that Shin's presence really sparks something within the Gyokuho unit. And it's at this point that we learn that after this night on the 13th day of battle, 2 days remain until the Battle of the Tsukai Plains reaches its finale. And that was the chapter in a nutshell, guys. Alright, so yeah, I thought that was a pretty good chapter, guys. It was pretty sad to me because Kyoko's death pretty much caught me off guard because I really wasn't expecting it, and I pretty much thought it was Banyo's time to go out. But the way things are starting to set up, it looks like he may be sticking around. And this chapter was just full of surprises. Like, nothing went the way we expected. I mean, I was expecting Shin to face off against Gi-eun. That didn't happen. I was thinking things may be wrapped up on this 13th day. That didn't happen. In fact, we find out that we have 2 more days left, which is interesting because right now, the Hishin unit in the right wing is pretty much out of food. I mean, I know everybody was given their rations and told to make them last as long as they possibly could, but man, I mean, living off the little bit of rations that they have left has to be demoralizing, and it has to affect them somewhat during their battles. Especially the Gyokuho, with Ohan out now and with no food. Shin's really going to have to take over and do something special for them to be able to keep on fighting moving forward. Especially since now we know that we have 2 days left. I'm actually wondering if both those 2 days are going to be dedicated to the right wing, because there's a possibility that things on the right wing may be done by day 14, and day 15 may actually focus more on the center with Osen and Raboku. And I'm really hoping that we see something from Osen soon. I hope that he has like some sort of backup rations to give his people, because even if they're successful in this battle, they would still have to figure out their food situation in order to be able to travel, to make it home, and in general be able to maintain their hold of Gyo after they capture it. So I'm almost positive that Osen has something planned here, and we should see what it is pretty soon. And right now at the right wing, it's looking like the whole thing is going to belong to Shin. And like we were talking about before, I'm pretty excited about that. I want to see how Shin, Kyokai, and Ten all handle this new responsibility. And the person I'm most excited to see have some time to shine is actually Ten, because she's had it pretty rough this arc, and I'd really like to see her get back to having some great strategies and plans. And I'd really like to see her go up against Chigaryu, because he's like the brains for the Zhao, and I think it would be a perfect match if she was to go against him and somehow outsmart him. And it's looking like round 2 of Shin vs. Gi-eun may be postponed for just a little bit longer. And after reading this chapter, even though I thought they were going to meet up and continue fighting on day 13, I actually kind of like this development because it's going to allow for Gi-eun to actually get some treatment on that arm and at least close up the gigantic hole that Ohan made. Even though he probably still won't be 100%, he'll definitely be better off than he is at this current moment. Yeah, but that's pretty much all I had to talk about with this chapter. So let's move on to the comment of the week. And this week's comment comes from Roan Joseph. And what he had to say was, I was legit hoping that with this spear being broken, we'll get to see Ohan use those swords on his back. And yeah, I know exactly what you mean, man. I wanted to see these swords used at least once in battle. I think the closest thing we've gotten to see from these swords in battle is when the 10 spears had Ohan trapped, and it looks like these swords actually protected Ohan from a fatal wound by blocking one of the attacks on Ohan's blind side. So for now, that's gonna have to do, even though I'm sure that's not exactly what you wanted to see. But beggars can't be choosers, right? Anyway guys, that about does it for this week's review. Let me know what you guys thought of the chapter in the comments section below. Please leave a like if you guys enjoyed the video, and feel free to share, comment, and subscribe. Peace out!